Infinity Ward has finally tried something crazy with its new third game mode, of course being raids. All of us here are crossing our fingers that this could finally be Infinity Ward's equivalent to COD Zombies, something that is actually on that level, but we still have to wait and see, because currently we're only on the first raid. And it definitely has some really cool things about it, but it also has some problems. And kind of thinking of those problems, I thought it'd be interesting to actually look at raids and also look at COD Zombies, you know, the two third game modes for Call of Duty. And the reason I want to look at these is I want to look at both of them and see what they have to offer that potentially the other one can learn from. And of course, we're mainly going to focus on what raids could learn from zombies, but we'll also talk about the reverse too, because I feel like there are some smaller things that zombies could probably take away from raids also. But with that said, let's start off with what raids can learn from COD Zombies. So the first one is a humongous no-brainer, something that I'll probably make its own video on in the future, but for now I'll just mention it in passing here. Boss fights. That is something that Zombies has been doing since 2016, and they have been, you know, up and down with the quality of the boss fights, but there has been some very solid ones. And I'd even argue some of the most solid boss fights we've got in COD Zombies weren't even actually from Treyarch. They were from Infinity Ward, the same people who are making raids right now. And of course I'm talking about Infinite Warfare Zombies. That thing had a nice set of boss fights, like the Attack the Radioactive Thing boss was really cool, and especially the Mephistopheles boss fight, that was also really cool. So really, when they look towards Zombies, they don't even need to just look towards Treyarch Zombies for some inspiration here, because they already did something like this in the past that they've done really well. And this is something that I think Raids really needs for its game mode to really kind of pop off, because right now the only thing that we had for a boss fight, at least with the first raid, was just a, I guess, lockdown where you got attacked by a ton of bots for 4 minutes, and also Juggernauts too, which isn't inspiring to say the very least. In fact, it's incredibly underwhelming, but you know, I think if you just like got the same exact raid and swapped off that final step with a final boss fight instead, like how much cooler would raids be? Like it would actually be pretty sick if you ask me personally. But at the same time, I do feel like raids can't just do the final boss fight thing like Zombies, because if you look at other raids out there, we could see that, like especially in Destiny, you don't normally just have a final boss fight. You have like mini boss fights before the final boss fight along the way, and if they eventually get to that, that would also be nice. But really my expectations now is just to kind of keep raids how they are with this first one, except just add a boss fight at the end. It will make it 10 times better, just trust me on this one. Now another thing that I think raids should probably learn from Zombies is to be a bit more complex with your puzzles and objectives to an extent. Now right away I want to say, do not go overboard with making them overly complex. Zombies made this exact mistake in Black Ops 4 and it was not great. And then of course with Cold War they kind of overcorrected and made everything a little bit too simple, but that's a whole different video for a different day. But regardless, the point is that I personally think that the objectives and also especially puzzles should be a bit more complicated, because if we look at the puzzles that we got in the first raid, we really just had the same puzzle twice except slightly different, but that puzzle is incredibly easy to solve. I think like 90% of people could figure that out after 10 minutes or so, you know, or at least people who play video games a lot would be able to do that. Like it was a very simple cipher to solve, and then you just kind of went back and forth and put the numbers in. Like to me, I just think that they should probably make their puzzles, first off, have more of them and a bigger variety of them, and second, just make them a bit more complicated. Don't get me wrong, there's a place for simple puzzles like this, like things that everybody can figure out. Like that should be a part of it, but maybe you have like 1 or 2 puzzles per raid that needs a bit more effort, needs some bit more community solving towards it. Like it takes a little bit more effort. Not everybody and their mom could figure it out. Personally, I just think that would help build the community. It's one of the main things with COD Zombies why it has a very solid community, is because it takes a community to solve its main Easter eggs, and that's something that they could try to capture with raids also. It takes a community to try to figure them out. Of course, they shouldn't always need a community to figure them out. Like initially it should, but once it's figured out, then you know everybody could do it themselves type of thing. You know, you guys get how it works for anybody who has played Zombies zombies. So, you know, they should just make their puzzles a bit more complicated, and maybe their objectives too, to an extent. They shouldn't always be a little bit more complicated. I keep stressing this, don't like overly complicate things and stuff like that. Like a good example I think that they already did pretty well with their objectives was kind of the underwater area where you kind of have a little maze to figure out. Like, to me, that is a really cool objective because it's not obvious on what you have to do there. You have to keep swimming, you have to hand the breather to all the different players in the game. Like, that's really solid. So just kind of continuing that trend for not all but a lot of objectives would be nice. Now, there's a lot of other things that I could point out that raids could learn from zombies from, but we don't want to be here all day, and we'll only stick to 3. And with this third one, I do want to stick with something that I feel very strong about. Yeah, I don't think it's actually going to happen, but I really wish that they would actually do this. And what this has to do with is the story, because right now the story of raids is directly tied to the campaign, and I am very strongly against this because, I mean, just look at what zombies is able to do, because zombies is its own story. They're able to do a bunch of magical, sci-fi, and just generally crazy things that you couldn't do if you were tied to the campaign. I mean, hell, like in zombies, you're fighting giant mechs, dragons, aliens, and a whole bunch of other weird creatures and stuff like that. And if it was tied to, like, I guess reality or like the campaign, that's just not something that zombies would be able to do. And that's why I'm here to argue that Raid should just do its own story. Let yourself go crazy with this story. Let us be able to have these crazy spectacles of boss fights and raids, things that happen there. It doesn't have to be magical or super sci-fi. It could just be a little bit sci-fi, you know, just like some crazy mechas and stuff like that. You know, things like that could really go a long way to make not only the story more interesting, but more importantly, make the gameplay 10 times better. Because I really think about like a problem with the boss fights right now, like what could you really do for a boss fight if you're trying to stick to some realistic story that the campaign's telling? Like, what could you really do? I mean, I know if there's sci-fi, you could like do a bunch of crazy things with it, but what do you do with a realistic story? And that's why till this day, I will keep repeating that raids should not tie its story into the campaign and try to be some super realistic thing. It should just be its own crazy storyline. And those are kind of the big things I think raids could probably learn from zombies in. But I thought it'd be fun just kind of do the reverse too. And this isn't going to be as long because, you know, zombies isn't currently around. We're not going to go in a lot of depth here. And, you know, raids is very early on, so there's not exactly a ton of things to choose from that zombies could learn from raids. But we'll go over a couple real quick. Now, the first thing is something that in the past I wouldn't have to say, but in recent years I have to. But it's the fact that for the very first raid that we've ever got in the history of raids, this thing had an entirely original map from start to finish. Sure, there's some homages to previous campaigns in the past, but those are homages. They're not like directly reusing stuff, right? And that's something that zombies has really been struggling with in the past. I mean, I think like for all but one of them zombies maps inside of Cold War, they were all reused from campaign. And then even going back to Black Ops 4, I think 4 of those maps were all reused or remakes from previous zombies maps. And that's not entirely exhilarating to a lot of people. We kind of want to see something new with zombies. So yeah, kind of take notes from that. We want to see original new locations for zombies maps and kind of make them crazy like this, because we look at what raids did, like that was entirely original and it looked pretty cool in a lot of the areas of it, especially the first opening area. That is really cool. I feel like it was a little bit underutilized, but that's again a different thing. Now, another thing that I think zombies should probably take notes from is the characters, because as much as I complained about the characters and the stories being tied to the campaign, I mean, at least they got a set crew for raids, which is something we didn't get in our last iteration of COD Zombies from Treyarch. Like, we were literally playing as operators who had no bearing on the storyline at all, and it really sucked, because you're missing out on so much possible storytelling things because you don't have a set crew. I mean, think about it. If we didn't have a set crew in the past, we would have never got Ultimus, Primus, Mob of the Dead crew, Shadows of Evil crew, Transit crew, whatever you want to say, whichever one you like. Like, we don't have one of the most iconic scenes in Call of Duty with the Blood of the Dead ending. We don't have any of that, and that's the reason why ever since day one on that I've seen we've had operators, I've been saying this, don't do this. This is stupid. We need to have our own story with our own characters that we could play as, and they have some actual ramifications in the story when you play as them. And right away, this is something that Raids recognize, and this is why we have a set crew of Farah, Gaz, and Price. And this brings me to the final thing I'll mention, and I'm now realizing all three of the things I'm going to mention are things that, you know, zombies didn't used to make mistakes in the past, but they are now for some reason. But what this has to do with is the intros and outros, because I keep saying it, but I really want to stress it again. This was the very first raid ever. Like, they didn't have to do a lot of these things, and one of the things they didn't have to do was have a fully rendered out both intro and outro. And this is something that is pretty significant to me, because in the last 2 games of zombies, we rather straight up didn't have one of these, or they were not fully rendered out. I mean, think back to Black Ops 4, like the end of that, we had drawings for intros and outros. And then with Cold War, we had rendered out outros, but there was like no intros at all to any of the maps. So, you know, zombies, you could rather learn from Raids, or just look back to your old stuff and realize that, hey, we used to do that too. Maybe we don't even need to learn from Raids for a lot of, if not any of these things that I've mentioned in this video. But there's still things that Raids are doing on their very first attempt that zombies should have probably never stopped doing to begin with. But regardless though, that's going to wrap it up for this video. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts and opinions on both what I said and maybe some things you want to add to this list. What are some things that Raids should take from zombies, and also zombies should take from Raids? Let me know down in the comment section below. Regardless though, if you guys did enjoy the video, definitely do all the normal YouTube stuff, like, subscribe, bell, share, and all that great stuff. But I'm going to go catch you guys next stream, video, or whatever the heck it may be, and laters guys.